Greetings to all our viewers tuning into our channel. If this is your first time with us, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the stories that are shaping the global economic and political landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 6 a.m. in the Caribbean Sea. Just as the sun rises above the horizon, its first light spilling across the rolling blue-gray waves. Yet amid this seemingly peaceful scene, the air on the deck of the USS George Washington aircraft carrier is thick with an indescribable tension. Every gust of wind, every radar blip, every exchange in the command room carries a heavy weight. They're used to being watched, used to being tested, but today something is different. 3 small dots on the radar are moving at 28 knots, making no detours, keeping no safe distance. They are heading straight toward the heart of the U.S. fleet. Through the scope of a reconnaissance aircraft, the steel-gray hulls come into view, and the red-yellow-blue tricolor of Venezuela flutters fiercely in the wind. This isn't a routine patrol. This isn't a naval exercise. This is a direct charge, a clear act of defiance. In that moment, the commander on deck sees the image and feels a chilling truth. Peace and war are sometimes separated by nothing more than a single wave. The American sailors don't load their weapons. They don't change course. They simply prepare silently, as if the entire fleet is stepping into a chess match where every move could seal their fate. Because if they yield, if they swerve, if this massive aircraft carrier alters its path, it would be an admission that the Caribbean is no longer free waters. But if they hold course, they accept all the risks, knowing that even a minor collision could ignite a crisis between two nations. The sky over the Caribbean at that moment wasn't just painted with the soft pink of dawn, but heavy with hundreds of eyes watching from Caracas, from Washington, from even Beijing. Because behind those 3 Venezuelan ships wasn't just a reckless decision. It was a strategy, a declaration to the world. We will bow no longer. And as those ships drew dangerously close, one question echoed in the minds of every observer. Why did Venezuela choose this moment, this sea, and this adversary to take the gamble? The answer doesn't lie in the crashing waves. It lies on land, where Caracas is trying to rebuild its standing after years of isolation, where foreign powers are weaving a new web of influence. And to understand why the Caribbean, seemingly calm waters, has become the world's flashpoint, we need to step back and see the full picture. From the banner-filled capital of Caracas to the newly reawakened coastal bases, where every movement now signals a political earthquake on the brink of eruption. From Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, a powerful wave of national pride is being stirred. Massive billboards bearing the image of President Nicolas Maduro raising a clenched fist against a red and yellow flag backdrop line the avenues. National television broadcasts repeat messages about the so-called Bolivar Arc, the term Venezuela's government uses to describe its strategy of expanding military and economic influence across the Caribbean. In the face of prolonged U.S. sanctions, Caracas has chosen to resist with symbols, not declarations of war, but small ships heading out into open waters, carrying the message that Venezuela will no longer stand outside the order built by Washington. Over the past 2 years, Venezuela's Navy has undergone a transformation from a small, dilapidated force into a formation capable of rapid deployment around offshore islands. Once abandoned bases in Puerto Cabello and La Guaira have been restored. Radar antennas are back up, fuel depots expanded. Images of young officers training alongside military advisors from China and Iran have become commonplace. Caracas knows full well it cannot win a real war against the United States, but it can create moments that command global attention, like the bold interception on that morning. Behind the risky maneuver lies a calculated political gamble. China seeks a foothold in the Caribbean, a region long considered America's untouchable backyard. In return, Venezuela receives technical assistance, radar equipment, and hundreds of millions of dollars in credit to keep its fleet operational. Iran provides fuel and spare parts. Russia helps train submarine officers, all of it woven into a geopolitical tapestry where the line between ally and dependency becomes increasingly blurred. For Maduro, this is a chance to prove that his nation can still challenge the U.S., even if only with 3 gray-painted ships. Across the ocean, Washington was not caught off guard. U.S. intelligence had been tracking Venezuela's naval activities for months, but what truly troubled the Pentagon wasn't the ships themselves, it was the message behind them. A small, sanctioned, and isolated country had dared to carve out a security zone right in front of a U.S. fleet. To American generals, it was a clear signal that the order they had long imposed on the Western Hemisphere was beginning to crack. Out at sea, Venezuela's small vessels surged forward, their bows slicing the water like silver blades in the morning light. In the distance, the USS George Washington held its cruising speed, while its escort ships quietly shifted into a defensive formation. Both sides understood perfectly well. One wrong move, an oversteered rudder, a misinterpreted radio signal, and everything could spiral out of control. And so, the confrontation between a small nation and the world's leading superpower didn't begin with gunfire, but with a silence so tense it felt suffocating. In the vast open ocean, where a single spark could ignite the flames of war, the two forces engaged in a wordless chess match where every glance, every maneuver carried the weight of a nation. This was a battle of nerves, where a navy needed more than weapons. It needed the resolve to keep steady hands amid crashing waves and the piercing gaze of an adversary. Out on the vast open sea, waves thudded dully against the hull, a steady rhythm like the heartbeat of a soldier holding his breath. The three Venezuelan patrol ships were now just over 10 nautical miles from the American formation, maintaining speed, offering no radio contact. Inside the USS George Washington's command room, not a single word was spoken. Everyone knew. At that moment, silence was more dangerous than gunfire. One wrong rudder turn, one misread signal, one mistimed blinking light, and these calm waters could instantly erupt into a blazing inferno. The USS Gravely destroyer was ordered forward. Its turbine engines roared to life, the ship tilting slightly as it sliced the sea, leaving a long white trail in its wake. The 5-inch gun turret rotated slowly, not aiming directly at the approaching vessels, but not looking away either. This was naval language at its most precise. Wordless, non-threatening, yet heavy with intent. On deck, groups of sailors held their positions, eyes sharp, hands close to triggers, but no one dared pull. The tension spread like current through copper wire, invisible but tightening every muscle it touched. On the Venezuelan side, their smaller vessels trembled faintly from aging engines, but their national flag fluttered defiantly. Inside the bridge, young officers peered through binoculars, lips tight, fully aware they were staring down a giant. They also understood that any collision would unleash consequences far beyond their control. And yet, in each of their eyes, there was a glint of defiance. They could not back down, not with the honor of an embattled nation resting behind them. A U.S. MH-60R Seahawk helicopter lifted off, kicking up sea mist as its blades thumped the air, their deep whirring echoing across miles. It carried no weapons, only scanning radar and surveillance lenses. But through Venezuela's thermal optics, it sent a message loud and clear: we see everything. That presence alone was enough to make the Venezuelan ships slow by half a knot. A new silence settled over the sea, heavier than the roar of crashing waves. In that fragile moment, U.S. officers held fast to protocol. No provocation, no retreat. They called it deterrence by presence. No need for firepower, just unwavering resolve. Some young sailors would later recall they could hear their own heartbeats as the enemy bows crept within a few thousand meters, sunlight glaring off silver paint, making the ships seem to glow with tension. Time seemed to crawl, each minute stretching into an hour. Both sides knew. Whoever fired first would lose in the court of global opinion. And because of that, the psychological pressure mounted. Sometimes real warfare isn't about weapons, but about who can stay calm the longest. And on that Caribbean morning, human nerve was tested to its absolute limit, in silence, through silence, by silence. Then the moment of decision came. The three Venezuelan vessels slowed, shifted slightly eastward, and cruised parallel to the U.S. formation before gradually peeling away. No apology was given. No official communication followed. Only the sound of waves and wind remained, along with a quiet, somber relief in the eyes of the sailors. They didn't celebrate, because they knew those ships were just the visible tip of the iceberg. And what lay beneath was far more dangerous, because while the sailors exhaled and tried to release the tension in their chests, Analysts in Washington and Western intelligence agencies were already working to decode what had really happened during that silent clash. No one believed Venezuela had acted alone. All eyes began to shift toward Beijing and Moscow, two names that always seem to surface when a small nation dares to challenge the world order. And from there, a larger question emerged. Was this truly just Caracas's recklessness, or a calculated move in a much bigger game? A game where unseen powers are quietly redrawing the map of global influence. Beneath the surface of that tense standoff lay an invisible battlefield, where the ships were mere pawns and the real players sat in conference rooms halfway around the world. From Beijing to Moscow, every signal from the Caribbean was being closely monitored. For China, this event was the perfect test. Does the US still have the strength and the will to maintain absolute control over its own backyard? For Russia, it was a chance to send a message that they could still keep America preoccupied, even in a region once deemed untouchable by Washington. Months before, Beijing had quietly put the necessary pieces in place for this game. Under the guise of naval development cooperation, China had supplied Venezuela with Type 360 mid-range radar systems, upgraded navigation and communications packages, and teams of civilian technical advisors stationed at coastal bases. But according to U.S. intelligence reports, the actual number of advisors far exceeded what had been publicly disclosed. Some of them were veterans of the PLA Navy, specialists who understood exactly how to counter U.S. maritime deterrence tactics. For them, Venezuela was a strategic laboratory, a place to study America's reactions without engaging directly. Russia, meanwhile, chose a quieter but no less deliberate path. After relations with the West plummeted to their lowest point since the Cold War, Moscow began viewing South America as a reflective front. Their support for Venezuela, repairing Kilo-class submarines, sending diesel engine maintenance experts, and reestablishing military communication networks wasn't merely technical. It was symbolic. If NATO could creep up to Russia's borders in Europe, then Russia could extend its reach to America's doorstep. And in this chess match, Caracas was simply the hand moving the pieces. But behind these maneuvers lies a troubling convergence. China and Russia, America's two strategic rivals, were quietly coordinating in the same theater. One provided the tech, the other combat experience and logistical support. Venezuela had become the meeting point of two worlds, a conduit through which credit lines, weapons, and influence flowed silently. That's why the carrier interception was anything but spontaneous. It was a message, scripted and sent at a moment when Washington's attention was stretched thin across the Pacific, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. In the sealed briefing rooms of the Pentagon, digital maps tracked every movement in the Caribbean. Security analysts noted that during the confrontation, Venezuela's 3 ships frequently changed radio frequencies, switching to encrypted bands that mirrored formats developed by China. This led many to believe that throughout the encounter, there was more than just Caracas watching. Perhaps a reconnaissance satellite hovering over the Pacific, or a data relay station as far away as Shanghai. This was no longer Venezuela's game alone. It had become a global test of America's patience, of China's coordination, and of Russia's readiness to pin Washington down right on its own front porch. All 3 powers understood. No bullets needed to be fired. A single misstep, even a minor collision, could be enough to tip the world off balance. And the most alarming part wasn't the risk of war. It was the realization that all sides were now willing to gamble in the gray zone between peace and confrontation. When the Venezuelan ships finally turned back, it may have looked like the story was over. But in truth, it was only the tip of an iceberg, rising from deep waters. Chinese state media began reporting on the collapse of the unipolar order, while Russian outlets praised the rebirth of a multipolar world. In Washington, generals and security advisors exchanged quiet looks. They understood that without the right response, the Caribbean could become another South China Sea, a place where the U.S. would be forced to yield ground. And so, just as the waters calmed, the Pentagon made its decision. Respond not with words, but with action. The carrier group stayed its course, no detours, no repositioning. Because in the rules of great power games, the first to step back doesn't just lose face, they lose the ability to shape the world order. And from that moment, Washington's response began. Quiet, restrained, but unmistakable. A reminder to the world that sometimes resolve itself is the clearest declaration of power. In Washington, an emergency meeting was called the moment the report of the standoff reached the Department of Defense. On the massive screen in the command room, a map of the Caribbean lit up, with red dots moving slowly, marking the positions of the Venezuelan ships. The atmosphere was heavy but not chaotic. The U.S. Navy's top commanders all understood. The right response wasn't to flex power, but to demonstrate resolve. A single misstep, even a sharp word on camera, could plunge the entire region into crisis. And so they chose silence, the kind of silence held by those who make the rules. No military warnings, no threats, no retaliatory statements. The USS George Washington carrier group stayed on course, maintaining formation, neither slowing down nor veering off path. In the unspoken language of naval operations, that was the strongest message of all. We do not recognize any no-go zones in international waters. Staying the course wasn't just a physical act. It was a declaration of principle, of order, of the belief that international law cannot be bent by power plays. At the Pentagon, a seasoned naval officer told a junior staffer, "A ship doesn't need to fire to win. It only needs not to turn." That phrase spread quietly through naval circles, a reminder that resolve is not stubbornness. It's how we uphold the principles that keep the world from descending into chaos. For the U.S., every free passage at sea is a statement that a rules-based order still exists as long as there are ships willing to sail through it. Meanwhile, Venezuelan media jubilantly claimed they had forced the U.S. Navy to halt at the Bolivar security zone. In Beijing and Moscow, the silence was deliberate, but the satisfaction was clear. In Washington, however, no rebuttals were necessary, because they understood the real victory didn't come from making the other side retreat, but from staying composed, refusing to be baited, refusing to let emotion steer destiny. A superpower cannot act on instinct. It must act on principle and vision. When the Venezuelan ships turned back, no one on the American decks cheered. They simply stood, watching the sea bathed in sunset, quietly acknowledging a truth. Sometimes preserving peace requires more courage than starting war. And from that moment, in disciplined silence, Washington delivered its clearest message yet. True strength isn't the roar of jet engines. It's the calm of a ship that knows it will not change course, no matter the storm ahead. But behind that quiet triumph, a lingering question remained unanswered. Will this resolve be enough to hold back the next wave that's already forming across the world's oceans? Because we've entered an era where freedom of navigation is no longer just a legal concept, it's a strategic weapon, where every ship, every voyage now treads the line between peace and provocation. And it is here, on these deceptively calm waters, that the story of the power of resolve reaches its final chapter. A world order being tested by waves that no longer seem so peaceful. As the sun slowly dipped below the Caribbean horizon, the last rays of light caught the hull of the USS George Washington, casting pale golden streaks across the still waters. The blaring horns had gone silent. The engines no longer roared. All that remained was the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against the ship's side, like the deep, drawn breath of the ocean exhaling after tension. And yet, beneath that serene surface, something had shifted. The world had just witnessed a confrontation without a single shot fired, a moment where the line between peace and conflict was measured in minutes of silence. And in that seemingly small window of time, the rules of global maritime order were redrawn, not with gunfire, but with the resolve of those who held firm to principle. The incident in the Caribbean is a mirror reflecting our times. If the 20th century was defined by wars of bullets and bombs, then the 21st is witnessing a different kind of conflict, one of symbols, of rules, and of willpower. Freedom of navigation, a phrase once confined to the dry language of international law, has become the sharpest of soft weapons. It doesn't just protect the right of ships to pass, but defends the very order of a world where law is the final barrier between civilization and chaos. Every voyage of a U.S. warship, every patrol through the South China Sea, the Black Sea, or the Caribbean is a test of that value. A ship that does not turn, a nation that does not bow. These are not merely assertions of sovereignty. but declarations that the world still has those who believe in principles, who believe in balance built on trust, not fear. And it is that belief, not guns or missiles, that sustains peace in a world teetering between the old and the new. As the task force commander told his sailors after the encounter, freedom of navigation doesn't pause for politics. His words rang out across the night sea, simple, yet steeped in the quiet courage of those who know that sometimes to preserve peace, you must keep going when everything around you is telling you to stop. And perhaps that is the greatest message of this era, that true strength lies not in those who carry more weapons, but in those who stay true to what's right, even when they stand alone in the middle of the ocean. If you have thoughts on this standoff, on the idea of freedom of navigation, or how the world is changing day by day, we invite you to share them in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel as we continue exploring the stories that are shaping the 21st century, where every wave carries a message, and every journey at sea is a reminder of the strength of the human spirit in the face of the storm.